So I'm Duncan Fraser, Director of Useful and Kind Unlimited, a charity which aims to develop pro-social behaviour and leadership, especially with young people. Welcome to our podcast series, which aims to explore how being useful and kind to yourself, others and to the world can make things better. Today, our theme focuses on what on earth are you doing with your life? In other words, are you living it on purpose and making the most of it for the good of the world? In particular, we'll explore vocation, calling and campaigning. We're thrilled to be joined today by two fantastic guests to help us with this. Kate Lee is the poster girl for Useful and Kind, having spent 30 years in the third sector and is now Chief Exec of the Alzheimer Society, having started there at the beginning of the pandemic. She's led Young Lives versus Cancer, what used to be known as Click Sergeant, where she won Charity Times Chief Exec of the Year, and Mighton Hospice, a large adult palliative care charity. A proud Yorkshire woman, Kate now lives in Coventry with her husband and two teenage children and leads authentically and transparently, as we shall see. It's a joy to have you with us today. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Duncan. Lovely to be here. And one of those teenage children is just about to leave for university, so strange times.
No attachment issues at all. Bernard Ross is the go-to global guru for all things on decision science, fundraising, and leadership in the ethical sector. And I have known him for what feels like 1,000 years. His witty, incisive, well-informed leadership, research, and training through the Management Centre, which he and his partner founded 33 years ago, has helped so many hundreds of volunteers, campaigners, professionals, and leaders alike. And his two books, Change for Good and Making the Ask, should be on everyone's bookcase. It's a joy to have you join us today. Welcome, Bernard.
Pleasure, Duncan. Thanks so much. That's a very generous endorsement. Thank you so much.
It's all true. Kate and Bernard are pro-social leaders in their field, not just in their jobs, but in the way they model pro-social leadership and in the way they lead their lives. And of course, importantly, we're all Northerners.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining us today. So, our theme this month is about vocation, calling, and volunteering. So I'm wondering, when did you first realize that you could make such a big difference? What was the early trigger for you? And did it feel like a calling or a vocation? Kate?
What a great place to start. I'm going to be really honest and say I think the voluntary sector found me. And actually, in the first instance, I think I've been thinking a lot about this whole topic because I've been thinking about it in its relationship to privilege. And actually, what's quite interesting is when I took my first job straight out of university, it wasn't a charity because, you know, I didn't have the luxury of deciding where I wanted to go. I just needed to earn some money. And I was fortunate to find my way into a charity. And I think it probably became a vocation from that day on. So I think the charity sector found me, maybe it called to me, but actually I once I got into the sector, and certainly once I started at Red Cross in my very early 20s, I just realized at that point, I think, just how important this kind of work would be for me, probably for the rest of my career.
Okay, thank you. Bernard?
Oh, again, it's a terrific question. I was trying to think. I have a very specific moment. I remember watching Kathy Come Home, which defines my age, in black and white on a TV, and saying, "Oh my God, that's happening here." Now, I wasn't, in a privileged background. I didn't blah blah blah, but that's outrageous. And I immediately got in touch with Shelter in that way you do when you're 14. And said to Shelter, I want to sort this out. And then did a whole series of summer projects. So they had a great way of bringing in young people. They had a big commitment to young people, and so I just got into it from that, and then fell in love with a whole range of causes. But I just remember that in the same way as, I remember going to, when I was 11, going to the opera and hearing the Magic Flute. and hearing a woman open her mouth and sing the Queen of the Night song in loving opera. So like my head is full of memories of very specific things, one of which has left me with a love of misogynist artwork, or opera as it's called, one of which has come to charities.
That Kathy Come Home is so important. I too had a childhood experience with that, which was emphasized when in the vicarage I was in, a homeless couple and their child knocked on the door, as they often did. And I remember with such clarity my mum taking them in, bathing the woman and her child, my dad trying to find a house for them. And I never really thought of it then, but that the kind of echoes of that, which I often talk about when I'm leading anything in housing, absolutely vital.
And I think just to build on that, Duncan, for a second, I think you and I both share a background in the arts. I don't know if you do so much, Kate, but the power of art, you know, like there's a lot of emphasis on documentary and, you know, letting people see what it's really like in a refugee camp or whatever, but actually art, you know, because Kathy Come Home is a fiction, but the power of art to engage us, a shaped experience is quite important. And I think as well as, you know, bringing people, as you wonderfully do, I think, Kate, you know, with the Alzheimer's, what's it like to experience these things, for people to understand that art can do a great job as well. You know.
And I would agree, and absolutely, and that, and the power of storytelling, which I'm absolutely passionate about, because I think actually so much of our work really can't be portrayed by anything other than just really telling individual stories, community stories, you know, and that really powerful, you know, such a powerful tool that's gone down through all the traditions, still absolutely alive and well in the voluntary sector in the UK. That storytelling power, I think, is incredibly important.
So in storytelling, we've traditionally had heroes and heroines. So I'm just wondering, who were your pro-social role models, either historic or from your early experience? Bernard.
Oh, goodness. God, these are tough questions, Duncan. This is turning into an episode of Mastermind rather than... who am I? Well, I tell you, maybe a hero, a slightly later hero in my life than that. We were talking earlier about an old boss of yours, I think, Kate, at the Red Cross. Whose name is now... Sorry, again?
Nick Young.
Nick Young, Sir Nick Young.
Going to say Nick. You can't have Nick. He was my choice.
Well, how interesting that we what an extraordinary man. No, you talk about him, because I'm fanboying on you and fanboying on him, but you tell people about Nick Young.
Yeah, I mean, I would, my brain went to Nick, actually, quite a few of my Red Cross colleagues, partly because Red Cross for me was a really, really informative part of my voluntary sector career. So I joined when I was 6 months out of university. I intended to just be there for a year. I came back up to Sheffield, which is where I'd studied, and I just was going to be there a year while I sorted myself out. And I was there for 17 years. And one of the things that people like Nick and another very close, was a manager for a while and then became a close sponsor and mentor, a woman called Jean Henderson, did, was, I think, really core to the useful and kind values. Nick is a very kind man and really sponsored me and always made me feel like I could be bigger than I was, that there was more in me. And I feel very passionate about sponsoring people now in my career. Just, you know, sometimes I wish I could throw my arms around everybody, but then I remind myself, even just to throw my arms around one person, just to mentor them, to sponsor them, to just phone them up and tell them I think they're amazing. It's just so important. And Nick was superb at that. He could make you feel like you could achieve anything. And in this sector, that's so important when we're dealing with such big causes. So I have been very lucky to have some very, very superb and influential people in that way.
Yeah, the thing I think about Nick Young, what you're saying is that you could be in a room full of people and he would only spend 30 seconds with you, but for those 30 seconds, you would feel like the most important person in the room. you know,
He still does that now.
Okay, sorry. That's who you should be interviewing, Duncan. There's your, because he is such an extraordinary. That's
Okay.
so interesting that we came.
So this is where I have to declare an interest, because Nick is an international advisor to Useful and Kind.
So I didn't know that. I didn't
either.
When I started to work in the third sector, I asked someone who at that stage was chief exec of Akivo to recommend a few people, and she recommended 6 people. And I wrote, you know, that classic email you do saying, please, would you possibly spare 20 minutes? And 4 of them replied. Nick gave me an hour and a half, and then had me do a lot of work at Red Cross and so on. And yeah, just absolutely amazing. He's hosted things for us where he'll be making the tea. He speaks with such passion and authenticity and love. Just fabulous. Oh, that was good.
You used an interesting phrase there, Duncan, which you talked about in the third sector. And I suppose it's interesting that we've flicked between the pro-social and the third sector. Because interesting, I mean, Kate, you work in a mainstream charity, and you know, and Red Cross is a mainstream charity. You know, they are charitable organizations which are great. They are confined by some things. What they have to, you know, politically, it's very difficult for you to speak out on some issues because of the constraints of the charity regulation. I've historically worked much more in what I'd call a pro-social business, so running something that is very clearly a business, and finding a different kind of freedom there, just because, you know, you can speak out about things. You can use them. So the very first check that we wrote in the management center 33 years ago, we wrote a check to the African National Congress, which was an illegal organization in Thatcher's Britain. And in return for that, they sent us a big ANC flag and a big poster. And we didn't even have a flagpole. We just kind of hung it out the window of our Newcastle office. But that ability to act like that feels pro-social. And I think it's good to see lots of businesses now.
Yeah.
But some greenwashing, some virtue signal. But I don't know if you'd agree, Kate, that, you know, I mean, I think lots of businesses now are accepting their pro-social mission, that, or part of their business has to be pro-social activity.
I think that's absolutely right, Bernard. I think that is increasing, and I think I as Duncan knows, I absolutely love the new generation of young people coming up in this country. I think they're powerful. I think they're pro-social. I think they get it. I think they will embarrass our generation in their understanding of the environment and their commitment and love for each other. You know, I find it profoundly powerful what is happening in you know, I think we need to step back and give them more power, more authority, more decision making, because I think they know what to do and we don't. So I mean, I would really agree very much with that, Bernard. And I think businesses are therefore becoming more pro-social, because if they don't, they'll die with this new generation of purchasers. But I think actually some charities, I'm really having lots of discussions about going back to our roots, finding that sense of, I don't know, slight rebelliousness. You know, I keep saying, you know, our founders didn't have a 70-page annual operating plan. They just said, come on, dementia will not win. You know, what are we doing today about this? And so I think there's space for us to go back to that crazy flag hanging time, Bernard.
Exactly. We call them positive disruptors, and that's what we're, just before we leave your young selves, then talking about the young generation. We've run, as you know, summer schools for 16-year-olds. So I'm wondering what you were both doing at 16, and looking back, does it have any hints about your vocation or your current role, or is it unrepeatable? Kate?
So I think we might talk about this before, Duncan. I think I had quite a tricky childhood for lots of different reasons. Didn't come from a privileged background at all. Went to a state comprehensive school. Lived in York, a city I have a love-hate relationship with, because lots of people who haven't lived in York think it's the most beautiful and tranquil and idealistic place to live. And actually, if you grow up there, it's quite a tricky place, and you know, some quite hard hidden areas of deprivation in the city as well. quite a difficult time. And I think certainly through my A levels, so maybe just at that tricky stage of kind of 17 and 18, really kind of finding myself. I think looking back on that period, I probably suffered with depression. I had some periods of self-harming when I was young, which I've talked about more confidently actually in very recent years. Partly to say to young people, this too will pass. I was there. Certainly I think our young people deal with the most traumatic mental health issues now, and thank goodness my childhood wasn't played out on social media as a lot of young people's are today. But I think 16 and 17, I was just about holding it together, and really probably found myself once I got to university and started probably to do my growing as an adult. And I think what's incredible is I now look back on that time. For a long time I was very embarrassed about that time in my life. Now I look back on that time and realize that I learned a lot of lessons about independence and resilience and trusting myself, that maybe I had to go through that, what was a horrible time at the time, to be the person I am now. And I often think if I could write to my 16-year-old self, I'd say, this is horrible, but goodness me, it's going to make you incredible when you're 50.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Brave and authentic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. What about the 16-year-old Bernard? What was he up to?
Oh, goodness. You were very flattering earlier, Kate, by saying of our generation. I thought I'm very flattered to be included. Okay. Or you've got a much better moisturizer than I have. I don't know, one of the two. I think I was maybe very different. So I always talk about my life and my career in 3 C's. So I'm a person who gets super committed things. So I was a Catholic, and then I was a communist, and now I'm a consultant. Okay. And I think when I was up until about the age of 15, I think I was a card carrying, if you can have a card carrying Catholic, I think I was a card carrying Catholic. And then it kind of fell away, and I don't mean to offend anyone, which of course means I'm about to offend anyone who's a Catholic. I really don't believe any of this stuff, this doesn't stack up. So that fell away. One of the things that Catholicism gives you is a need for ideology, like a system of belief. And at that time, we're talking about the Cold War, like communism seemed like a really positive thing, or a kind of communism that might involve social justice. I mean, it's almost the same thing as the Catholic Come Home, charity. I realized that shelter couldn't fix homelessness. You need the government to build houses and to regulate land. That's what same chance for you, Kit. I mean, you need the government to step up and spend money or not. You can't sort it out. The stuff we have to sort out. So I became quite a committed and a communist, and then latterly an anarcho-syndicalist. I can just imagine some of your millennial readers looking up the word communist and looking up the word anarcho-syndicalist. What are these things? And then I went to the university super soon. I went way too young, I think, at 17. That's just way too young to go to university, which you can do in Scotland. And then was a kind of a card-carrying communist and like very committed to politics and all that stuff until I left and became a consultant, I think. And then actually it's the same gig.
Consultant. It's
just the same gig, except you just have a different set of beliefs and a different set of tools.
Oh, marvelous. I mean, I think it comes to one of the central issues of money. For me, I had the childhood mantra of to give and not to count the cost, which is not always a great way to run a business. But it seems to me that the central idea of vocation and calling is this sense of being compelled to do it, to lead, to live, to act for the welfare of others, regardless of payment. So I think there's 2 different issues here. And Kate, you've worked with many hundreds of volunteers who've given their time freely to help others. And Bernard, you've spent a considerable chunk of your life helping others to give time and money. I'm wondering what you both think about the importance of volunteering and maybe how it's changing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start. I think my own development and my own career has been deeply rooted in volunteering for maybe a slightly different reason to many others. So my very first role as a service manager, as I say, back with Red Cross in the early 90s, I was given as a kind of newbie 21-year-old, no management experience whatsoever. And I was given a team of 15 volunteers to manage. And goodness knows what they thought. I mean, some of them was a service delivered in a mining village in Barnsley, and I'd rock up in my little car with my little skirt on and my little shoes and tell them all what to do. And I think they'd all roll their eyes. But what an incredible way, and I have always attributed this, is that I think my ability to lead without power, my ability to persuade, my ability to storytell, to vision, to get people to come with me on a journey has been so developed. I haven't spent a year of my professional career in an organization that doesn't have volunteers. They have been part of my entire career history. And so I think for me, actually, volunteering gives the most incredible set of gifts, as well as is deeply beneficial and rewarding for the individual that volunteers. And one of the things I also think about volunteering is it can be both altruistic and amazing and, you know, give the most incredible social contribution back. But also I always say to people, it's fine to get something out of volunteering too. That's fine. You know, maybe that's a new friendship group, maybe that's social, maybe it's company, maybe it's skills development, maybe it's about a different understanding, maybe it's about working with a new community. So I'm doing some volunteering at the moment just to get a better understanding of a community I could never understand. I will always be on the outside of. I'm doing some volunteering with a local group to just have more access to that community. And I think that's fine, actually, Duncan. I think that's still just incredibly powerful. And I think for me, I think I sometimes don't think it helps to kind of paint volunteers as just this completely kind of do-gooder group of people who just give everything up selflessly. I think that's a huge part of it, and it is incredible. But it's also a group of people who are really properly engaged and have thought about their volunteering. And I love volunteers. I think it's an incredible gift to give.
I think it's fantastic that you've talked about your own volunteering, because I don't know about you, but in my experience of working with chief execs and directors, they often say, well, you know, volunteering is the day job. I don't do anything myself. And I think you've completely forgotten the point of actually, if you're doing it yourself, whatever it is, hard as it is to do, that it's really important and refreshing, both, you know, personally and professionally. I mean, Bernard, this is your thing. What do you feel?
Well, yeah, it is necessary. I was going to say, I mean, of course, I don't volunteer a lot. I don't deal a lot in organizations that do volunteering directly, although I'm, again, like you, Kate, a huge fan of the Red Cross and the Volunteer Committee and the RNLI. I just love the RNLI, you know, and if you look at what's happened recently with, you know, the way the Daily Mail has attacked the RNLI for, doing their mission, rescuing people at sea. Hello, that's what we're paid to do. And yet what's happened is, you know, volunteers will say, you know what, I give my time to do this work. So really get off my case. That's such a powerful mandate. Like it gives you the right to ask, if you're a volunteer, like if you're a paid fundraiser, Kate, you know, I'm kind of looking at you going, well, you're paid to ask me for money. If you're a volunteer, you have an absolute right to ask me for money because you have made that gift of your time, you know, and that whole thing that the Red Cross does about time, talent, and treasure, you know, and talent is an important part of it. The only bit of volunteering, I always try and have a little volunteer side hustle, I like to call it. My most recent side hustle is working in a cemetery, so in an abandoned Victorian cemetery. Abandoned because it filled up during the Victoria, you know, it's really sad to walk around this cemetery and you see, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, 10 kids, 5 died in childbirth, 3 died of the, you know, I mean, and the place, they just didn't build it big enough. so many people died in that period. So, you know, and that's shocking. Anyway, it's completely overgrown and was left for kind of 100 years. And then a group of volunteers, of whom I am the youngest. So actually, I'm really going because I'm the youngest person there. They think I'm the charming young man, which is very great. Except I'm the stupidest in that I'm not trusted to do anything apart from. And what I spend most of the time is scrubbing the dirt and the moss off the names on the graves very carefully to bring back. And it's hard to describe the pleasure of rubbing away the grime to bring up a name of somebody I don't know, but it's almost like I brought them not quite back to life. And then other people are doing important stuff like rescuing incredibly rare bugs or plants that I would probably have weeded out and saying, no, that's some super. But I love doing that for like 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday, and doesn't require my brain at all. In fact, they don't even know what I do for a living, which is probably just as well. They'd ask me to raise the money. But that physicality of doing that and being the youngest person in the room is, so you have to imagine how old the people are.
Told you get something out of it for yourself.
Yeah, and cake and cake and tea at the end. What more is that to love?
I love the idea of bringing them back to life, or you having a connection.
Yeah.
Talked in a previous podcast, the idea of, you know, either the Iroquois Indian idea that whatever decision you make, you should think about the impact 7 generations hence, or the Obama Foundation talks about, think about the oldest person you know, and think about the youngest. And if you work it out, there's a 200-year span. And so, you know, what are you? What's the cog? What's the difference you're making there? And actually, you're connecting with that, Bernard, in a way.
Yeah. But I mean, I admire what you were talking about, Kate. I mean, I think that's quite a tough thing for you to go and work in an Alzheimer service. That's what because you're then kind of what you can't pretend to be the secret boss like that TV show.
No.
Suddenly rip off your blonde wig and take off your chemise and say, I am in fact Kate Lee. You're kind of on the spot in that. I think that's super brave of you to do that. I mean, a great piece of modeling. Super brave of you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I have done some of that in the past though, Bernard. I have volunteered for events that were linked to my own organization where I've kind of slunk along. It's easier now at Alzheimer Society because it's much bigger. I'm doing the memory walk on Saturday morning, volunteering at one of our memory walks, and I thoroughly enjoy it anyway, and it's lovely to kind of see lots of people. But I do actually like volunteering for organizations that also have nothing completely different to what I do, and a little bit like yourself, I don't really say who I am or what I do, and I just rock up and just do whatever's needed, pour the tea. I've got a huge empathy with the work of the food bank, and I think when I've promised myself when things settle down a little bit in my new role at Alzheimer Society, that's definitely my next volunteering. I would absolutely love to do more volunteering with food bank, which isn't particularly related to dementia, but it's just a great, I don't know, it takes you out of yourself. It's a different experience. But with all my volunteering, I think one of the most common themes is it's just about really working with people who are, for lots of different reasons, from seldom heard communities or really living tough lives. And one of the things it gives me is it keeps me real. I've taken my children to work in charity shops where they've seen parents coming in and buying items from the charity shop for school uniforms, coming in and buying their children's Christmas presents in them. And I don't mean it to sound glib, because it really isn't that, but it's so important to just keep myself grounded, because I'm making decisions in my everyday life as chief exec of Alzheimer Society where it's hard to be useful and kind if you have lost track of what people who are living under the poverty line in this country need in order for you to be useful and kind to them. You really have to understand that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just picking up on that, Kit, I think that we all have experience. I'm ashamed. I have to say, I'm ashamed that we have to have food banks in this country. That should be so. every time I see a homeless person sitting on the street, thinking you have a mental health problem and an addiction and you're homeless, we should be looking after you. That sorry, that's what I pay my taxes for. That should be, and me giving you £1 alleviates my conscience, but it doesn't do an awful lot for you, to be honest. So I mean, I think a big issue, and I know from your Red Cross experience, Kate, you'll be interested. I feel terribly troubled that we've become super obsessed between Brexit and all of that, with the UK. I got an email last night. I give money to MSF in the USA as it happens. I got an email last night from MSF saying a third of the population in Madagascar are starving. I thought, I didn't, I knew about Yemen, I know about Syria, I know about Afghanistan. I wasn't even aware that, and so the challenge is how, as part of, creating a good and fair society, some things that we experience, maybe like dementia or cancer, we all have a personal experience of that. There's a real challenge getting this country to being back to think, caring about the world, to being international, and caring about bad stuff, some of which we have created, let's be honest, in the Middle East, some of which we have created. How do we get people to really care about that enough? And when they can't connect it in the same way, you're only ever going to see on, how many people are ever going to go? You've probably been to a refugee camp in your life, and that's an experience that will stay with me for the smell of a refugee, the smell of poverty. How do we get people to care about domestic things and about international things, because they're all important as an issue?
It's really important stuff, Bernard. I mean, we've done quite a lot of research and thinking and writing about the prosocial psychology and how, we are, in spite of what people think, genetically predisposed to be kind. The in-group first, all the kind of gene stuff, but then proximity is a real issue, as we know from bystander effect and all that stuff, that actually when someone is close and you can feel it, or all the stuff you've done, Bernard, about telling the individual story, not the whole thing, I think is so important. There is a positive in this, which is that there are 21 million volunteers in the UK. And I love it that the local food bank rejected me because they've got too many volunteers. Okay. Great. I mean, I think we're coming on to the kind of final bit of our theme, which is campaigning. And I often get reminded that, we are in a better place in the world than we've ever been. However, we're in a desperate place in the world's history. Tectonic shifts politically, socially, and environmentally. It's widely accepted that we need a new kind of leadership, and Kate has talked about that with the next generation. Bernard, you're the expert at persuading and nudging folk to make things better for themselves, for others in the world. Do you really think we have the tools we need to address the huge changes we all face?
I kind of agree with Kate. This is the kind of running theme, Kate, here as part of the fanboy thing, but I think you're right that this generation, certainly of which I am part, has failed to address those issues, and it's a bit like, we failed in Afghanistan, like the army failed or whatever, we failed a generation, INGOs, even the biggest INGOs have failed to fundamentally address some of the issues to do with poverty and stuff like that. I think that next generation, we need to give them more space and more encouragement. When I was watching the whole Greta Thunberg thing and the school strike, and you saw kids saying, hang on a minute, this is our planet that you're messing up. And the power of those hundreds of thousands of kids marching through the streets in London, in Mexico City, in Lagos, and amazing global movement. Not as far as I know, helped by any management consultants or chief executives of NGOs, just some, amazing young women, just taking that stuff on. And then partly because of the pandemic thing, that just seems to got blown off the register, doesn't it? Blown off the screens. I just hope that group of young people get back control of the media and get back control of things. That's, that's what we have to do, is let somebody else who's got some new ideas, take control of the challenge.
We've done a lot of thinking, obviously, about Greta, because for shorthand, when someone says what's useful and kind, I say we're developing the new Gretas. And one of my concerns is what happens to those movements? What happened to Occupy? What will happen to Extinction Rebellion? And whenever I've talked to people before, they say it doesn't matter, because it's the individuals working together in small groups that will bring about the change. But also, I think we've done a lot of thinking around being useful and kind to the difficult others, but starting with listening and empathy and all that stuff. And that has to start with, in my case, my generation accepting we made a complete mess, now wanting to help the next generation of young leaders, but actually do they want or need our help? So I think it's quite a difficult thing, but of great hope too. Kate, what do you think?
For me, I think it's really interesting. I think, like so many people, sometimes I think about the size and the scale of problems and issues in the world, and I just feel overwhelmed. And that happens, I'm bringing it back to home, but within my own cause about dementia, it's quite easy to just feel overwhelmed. You know, 850,000 people living with dementia now, rising to 1 million in the next couple of years, no cure, very few treatments, massive stigma about people getting a diagnosis, massive stigma once they've got it. And it's really easy to feel quite overwhelmed. And I do like, I mean, you've talked about this certainly through some of the useful and kind philosophy, which is just, I've been very influenced by the founder of Click Sargent, a gentleman who sadly died 18 months ago, called Bob Woodward, who really believed in that starfish analogy. It's like, you know, you've got all the starfish on the beach and you're throwing them back in at the one at a time. And, you know, that sense like, well, this can't sort out everything. And it's like, nobody can sort out that one. Yeah. You know, and through the power of individual action and the power of one person volunteering that becomes two people volunteering, you know, the power of thinking, actually, in feeling overwhelmed, the likelihood of doing nothing at all is not helpful. I think that's really the case and has been really helpfully harnessed in some of the environmental issues, which is, you know, just start by thinking about your own plastic waste. You know, just start somewhere. Don't feel overwhelmed. And I you know, I talk a lot to young people in schools, been talking quite a little bit to graduating students at the end of last year, and saying, just don't let feeling overwhelmed stop you. You can change the world, but it starts with an action. It just, you know, think big. You can change the world. You know, I said to our Alzheimer's staff team today, you know, dementia is not going to win. We are not going to let it win. But that means knuckling down and doing what we're doing better than ever, because of course a cure is not on the horizon, and just keep going. And so I think it's something about that tenacity, that resilience, and that still that sense about individual action. So as an individual, being useful and kind will add up to something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And I think we still need to capture that, and we need to help the new generation coming up through the ranks know that it's fine to have days where you didn't achieve anything, or you just achieved a tiny little thing, because all those tiny little things will add up to the big world change you want to see.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. And, you know, compassion fatigue is a thing for us. It's a thing for those people we work with, especially in the fields that we do. And, you know, when we are thinking, oh, why haven't we got more social media followers, or why haven't we changed the world by Tuesday, although Monday would be good. And often I work with chief execs who, you know, after they leave their job, go, well, you know, it was what's really happened. But the fact is that you did make that change while you can. And I keep coming back to the idea of just modeling it. Just live your life humbly and modestly, love thy neighbor as thyself, and get on with it and do what you can. And I use the image sometimes of, you know, I saw an oak tree and a primrose together. And I think the oak tree is brilliant at being an oak tree, and the primrose is great at being a primrose. They should never try to be each other. They should just be what they are for the life, glorious. And then that's it. Bernard, you're about to.
Yeah, no, just I was just thinking about it. It's so interesting when you were talking there, Kate, about the idea of agency. How do I get agency in this situation? You know, well, okay, so but I love an image that stays with me. I'm maybe showing my age again here is the Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
You know, the man and this guy, the little video clip is clearly about a guy who's been shopping. He's got a carry bag, so he's been shopping and he's crossing a road and he turns around and he sees some tanks. And there's actually a moment where he clearly decides whether he should walk on, carrying on crossing the road, or he stops and he just stands in front of the tank and he kind of stands there with his shopping. That's the bit I really like, is holding to his shopping and almost appeals to the kindness of the guy driving the front tank. Yes. And, you know, he could die. Well, let's be clear. And many, many thousands did die. But that one man decided to take a risk and take his agency. And you can see the tank kind of backing. I've never seen a tank back up the guys, you know, and that image still stays with me as an example of somebody in a completely ordinary situation, just making, in a moment of choice, I have the ability, and he didn't know he's being filmed. I mean, he did not know he's being filmed. He decided to make a choice about the ethical and proper action, not by violently attacking the tank with his shopping.
It's true. I mean, I talk a lot about it, Bernard, because I talk a lot at work about saying when people get frustrated, you know, oh, we did this great big campaign, it didn't get anywhere, or we've been really lobbying on this and it's still not changed, and yeah, how frustrating. And I talk a lot about fishing, and I say, you know, you cast your rod into the water, cast your line into the water, and 9 times out of 10, you won't pull out a fish, but you definitely won't catch a fish if you don't go fishing. So one day we're going to pull something out that is going to change the world of dementia, but we've got a fish to do it. And really interesting for us, because we had a meeting with number 10 back in January, and a special advisor said to us, you know what, this January, she said, social care will never make it onto the government's agenda. It's not a voter issue. Voters don't care. Most people think it's free. We're about to head into massive youth unemployment. You'll never get social care on the agenda above youth unemployment. You know, she said, it's not a voter issue. And our team just said, what if we make it one? Mm-hmm. And she said, well, then that will move the dial. And we have just gone hell for leather since January making this a voter issue. And you know, we didn't do it alone. We haven't put social care on the agenda alone. Lots of organisations have been working in the same way. But that was a really good example that I said to the team, that's because we fished. You know, what happened yesterday, the announcement yesterday, it hasn't gone far enough, of course. There's a huge amount more to be done. It's a tiny step in the right direction, but it was a step that would never have been made if organisations like ours didn't say, what, forget it, let's just put the rod in the water and see what's going to happen here. So I mean, I think that's the campaigning piece. I think is really important, is just to not be defeated. Don't expect it to be a success, but just what is it, eternal optimism and fierce realism held in one in each hand, and you can change the world.
And who, when asked by Kate, wouldn't go fishing and wouldn't go and stand in front of a tank with Bernard? So I want to say a huge thank you to our guests, Bernard and Kate, for all they're doing to make
thank you, Duncan, for the chance to. And what a pleasure to see you again, Kate. It's such a fan. Get some merchandise, girl. Get some merchandise, girl. Now buy some.
And I'd like to thank our producer, Hannah Johnson, for being with us. Please join us next time when we explore creativity and how artists can help us make both sense and change in the world. Till then, be useful and kind.